Welcome to From Manuscript to Ministry, created and produced by Elder William Moore, the podcast where faith meets the written word. Each week, your hosts David and Martha dive into powerful, self-published books by Christian authors who are boldly using their God-given voices to impact the kingdom. Whether you're an aspiring writer, a reader seeking spiritual growth, or a ministry leader in search of authentic resources, this is your space to be inspired, encouraged, and equipped. Let's explore today's featured book and uncover the life-changing message behind the manuscript.
If you walked up to a mountain today, like a literal geographic mountain out in nature, planted your feet, put your bare hands against the sheer rock face and just tried to push it out of your way, you wouldn't exactly be called faithful. You'd be called, well, insane.
Right, yeah. Or at the very least, just deeply confused about the basic laws of physics.
Exactly. And yet, there is this ancient text that suggests the defining characteristic of a successful, a transcendent life involves doing exactly that.
Which is wild when you think about it.
It is. Not just wishing a mountain would move, not hiking over it or, finding a way to walk around it, but actually expecting it to shift, which is this fascinating, almost absurd premise when you first hear it.
Oh, it sounds totally absurd. Until you realize that the text isn't actually talking about geology.
Right.
It's talking about the architecture of human limitation, and what happens when that limitation collides with something entirely outside of itself.
Yes, and that is the absolute crux of our deep dive today. I'm so glad you were joining us for this conversation because we are really trying to strip the paint off a concept that has been heavily, heavily diluted by modern culture.
It really has.
We are looking at William Moore's book, From Ordinary to Extraordinary, 33 motivational quotes from Judges chapter 6, verse 12. And specifically, we're anchoring ourselves to quote number 22 today, which reads, "You can move mountains with your faith. Have faith in the power of God."
It's a really short quote, but I mean, the psychological and spiritual implications of it are just massive.
They are. Now, if you've been following this topic with us, you already know the historical backdrop, right? We aren't going to rehash Gideon hiding in the winepress.
Yeah, we've covered that.
Right. We know the ancient socio-political dynamics of the Midianite oppression. So today, we are taking this ancient framework and colliding it with your life right now, today. Because if faith is just some historical trivia fact, it's completely useless when your bank account drains.
Or when your MRI results come back bad. And I think that's where Moore's analysis is so incredibly compelling. We are looking at the true anatomy of faith here. This isn't about, conjuring up a positive mindset to manifest a good parking spot.
Right. It's not The Secret.
No, not at all. This is about a radical shift in focus from what we can control to divine omnipotence. We are going to examine the actual mechanics of how that works and why, which is perhaps a bit of a paradox, having total certainty is absolutely not required to move the obstacles in your life.
Okay, so to start, I think we have to look at the posture required to even stand in front of the mountain. Because the natural human instinct when facing an immovable object isn't to push it.
No, it's to run away.
Run away, or, to set up camp in its shadow and just accept that, well, this is as far as you go.
Yeah, which brings us to a fundamental redefinition of the battlefield. We really have to talk about the concept of valor. Usually, when we use the word valor today, we picture a soldier getting a medal.
Yeah, like military bravery.
Right. Exactly. If you look at the Merriam-Webster definition, it's about strength of mind or spirit that enables a person to encounter danger with firmness. So we think of bravery under fire. It feels like an endurance test.
It feels like just taking a punch without falling down.
Right. But the sources take us into the biblical Hebrew word used in this context, which is chale. And chale fundamentally disrupts that passive interpretation.
How so?
Well, it appears constantly throughout the ancient texts, but it doesn't mean a quiet internal resolve where you just sort of grit your teeth. It denotes power.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it denotes a militant act of boldness. It's actually a term assigned to commanders and warriors. It is the capacity to face hazardous circumstances head-on with a strength of spirit that is inherently offensive, not defensive.
Okay, wait, I have to challenge this right here. Because applying military terminology to faith feels inherently problematic in our current cultural climate. you know?
I completely understand why you'd say that.
Yeah. Like when you say militant faith or a battle stance, that immediately sounds like toxic aggression. It sounds like the kind of combative posturing that alienates people. So how do we draw the line between this spiritual valor and just being, I don't know, a confrontational jerk who thinks God is on their side?
That is a crucial distinction to make, and the text is very, very clear on this. The aggression in Chael is never, ever directed at people.
Okay.
Your neighbor is not the mountain. Your coworker is not the mountain.
Right.
The battlefield we are talking about is internal, and the opposition is the circumstance that contradicts God's promise. True Chael is a militant refusal to surrender to despair. It is an aggressive stance against hopelessness, against fear, and against the lie that your current limitation is permanent.
Okay, that makes much more sense. It's not about weaponizing faith against others. It's about, like, weaponizing hope against despair.
Precisely. If you think about the psychology of facing a hazard, fear tells your brain to freeze, flight, or fawn. Right?
Yeah, the basic trauma response.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, Chael is the spiritual override of that neurological response. It's the strength of mind that allows you to encounter danger with firmness. You aren't pretending the danger doesn't exist, because that's just toxic positivity.
Oh, absolutely.
You are looking directly at the danger and refusing to let it dictate your reality.
So it's an active engagement. You know, culturally, we often treat faith like a sedative.
Yes, a coping mechanism.
Right. Things get hard, the world gets terrifying, so we use faith to numb ourselves. We close our eyes and just sort of hope the threat passes. But what you're describing, what Moore is highlighting in this text, means faith isn't a retreat, it's an advance.
And that posture change is the absolute prerequisite for moving any mountain. I mean, you cannot command an obstacle to move if you are internally bowing down to it.
Wow. Yeah.
You have to rise as a person of valor. You have to acknowledge the hazard and still step onto the battlefield.
Let's talk about that battlefield then, because the mountains we are facing today, they don't look like ancient armies. They drop into our living rooms without warning, and they are terrifyingly domestic, you know?
Oh, completely.
What are the specific modern mountains that require this kind of Chael?
Well, the sources categorize these into several deeply relatable areas. First, you have financial and career mountains. And this isn't just, missing a promotion at work.
Right.
We are talking about crippling business failures, sudden job loss in a terrible economy, or the suffocating weight of debt that mathematically just seems impossible to clear.
Yeah.
From a human perspective, those numbers are an immovable rock wall.
And it triggers a profound survival panic.
It does, completely. Then there are health and emotional mountains, battling a chronic, debilitating illness where the medical community has basically run out of answers.
Yeah, that's a huge one.
Or carrying deep emotional wounds, clinical anxiety that paralyzes you from leaving the house, or depression that makes simply getting out of bed feel like a Herculean task.
Yeah. I think we also have to highlight the relational struggles the text points out, because those often feel heavier than the financial ones, to be honest.
Oh, definitely. The emotional toll is massive.
We are talking about severely fractured marriages, estrangement from children, or betrayals that are so deep the trust seems permanently shattered.
Yes. And there's one more category that sources mention, which I think is perhaps the most insidious because it happens in isolation. And that's spiritual discouragement.
The unanswered prayers.
The unanswered prayers.
Yeah.
The delayed dreams. The calling you felt so certain about 10 years ago that still hasn't materialized.
I want to pause on that one, because the sheer agony of a delayed dream is profoundly disorienting. When you are standing right in front of one of these mountains, let's say it's a terrifying medical diagnosis or a relationship that just fell apart, a mountain doesn't just block your physical path, it blocks your vision.
That's a great point.
If you've ever stood at the base of a massive rock face, you know it casts the shadow over everything. You can't see the horizon. You can't see the sun. All your brain can process is the rock. And because your vision is blocked, your fear centers just go into overdrive.
That is the perfect way to describe the cognitive narrowing that happens in trauma or crisis. When the mountain is all you can see, human logic dictates that the mountain is the only thing that exists.
Right.
Your entire reality is defined by the obstacle.
Which is why we need a mechanism to break that cognitive loop. Now, the frustrating part about faith, and let's be totally honest here, is that it doesn't always instantly vaporize the mountain.
No, rarely does.
Right. You pray, you exhibit Chael, you stand firm. Wait, no, I mean, you stand firm, and the bank account is still empty the next morning. The tumor is still there.
And this is exactly where people abandon the concept entirely. If faith is just a transaction like I put in belief, I get out a miracle, then the moment there's a delay, the system feels broken.
It feels like a scam.
Exactly. But Moore's text introduces a profound perspective shift here. Faith changes how the believer approaches the circumstance before the circumstance itself ever changes.
How so? Like, practically, what does that mean?
Well, where the human perspective, driven by that cognitive narrowing we talked about, sees an absolute permanent impossibility. Faith looks at that exact same rock wall and sees a canvas.
A canvas.
Yeah, it sees an opportunity for God to demonstrate his glory. It introduces a third variable into what we thought was a binary equation. It's no longer just me versus the mountain. It is me, the mountain, and the omnipotence of God.
Okay, but this brings us to a massive paradox in the source material. If the mountains we are facing are this huge, if the medical crisis is terminal, if the bankruptcy is finalized, the logical assumption is that we need a superhuman, gigantic amount of faith to counteract it. Huge problem equals huge faith required.
It feels like basic physics, doesn't it? You need an equal and opposite reaction.
Exactly. But the text shatters that equation entirely with what it calls the mustard seed mandate. Let's look at Matthew chapter 17, verse 20. Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you."
Oh, it's such a famous verse.
It is, but think about it. We all know the mustard seed is microscopic. Why on earth would the standard for moving a massive, life-destroying obstacle be something that small?
Because it is a deliberate, brilliant subversion of human logic. Jesus is explicitly decoupling the size of the obstacle from the size of your faith. The mustard seed mandate proves that the volume of your faith isn't the active ingredient.
Okay, if the volume isn't the active ingredient, what is?
The object of your faith. Let's look at quote 22 again. It says, "You can move mountains with your faith. Have faith in the power of God."
Right.
It does not say have faith in the intensity of your own belief. It does not say have faith in your ability to never doubt. It directs all the operational power onto God's omnipotent might.
This makes so much sense mechanically. Let me run an analogy by you. Think about a massive titanium bank vault door.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
It weighs several tons. It is designed to be entirely immovable by human strength. If you walk up to it and try to push it, you fail.
Obviously.
Now look at the key that opens it. The key fits in the palm of your hand. It weighs a few ounces. The key itself does not possess the brute force, the mass, or the kinetic energy to knock down the vault door.
Not even close.
Right. But the key doesn't need brute force. Because that tiny key is perfectly designed to engage the lock mechanism, its small size leverages access to something massive.
I love that.
The source text is essentially calling steadfast faith the key to conquering life's toughest obstacles. Your mustard seed faith is the key. It doesn't need to be the size of the door, it just needs to be placed into the right lock. It has to be placed into the character and power of God.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the causality of faith. High leverage, low mass. You only need a tiny seed of genuine trust because you are connecting to an infinite power source.
Wow.
Focusing on the size of the mountain breeds despair because you're comparing the mountain to yourself. But focusing on the omnipotence of God breeds that shale valor we talked about because you are comparing the mountain to the creator of the universe.
Okay, but let's take the vault door analogy one step further because, well, having a key in your pocket doesn't open a door.
No, it just weighs down your pocket.
Exactly. You actually have to walk up to the door, insert the key into the mechanism, and turn it, and that requires action. Which brings us to the actual mechanics of trust. How do we turn the key?
Turning the key looks like stepping forward without having all the answers. And this is the real friction point for modern listeners, I think.
Oh, for sure.
We live in an era of unprecedented data. We want the spreadsheet, the predictive modeling, the 5-year plan. We want to guarantee that if we take step A, God will immediately provide outcome B.
We want risk mitigation.
Precisely. But trusting God inherently requires stepping forward before receiving the risk assessment. The text brings in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. We walk by faith, not by sight.
Not by sight. Meaning, the empirical data your eyes are taking in is grim. The bank account says 0. The text message says, "I want a divorce." Your site is giving you highly accurate, highly terrifying data.
Yes. And walking by faith does not mean you deny that data. Again, valor faces the hazard head on. Walking by faith means you refuse to let that empirical data have the final authoritative word over your life.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. You walk according to the promise, not the parameter. And that means moving before you are certain of how it will work out. In fact, if you had certainty, you wouldn't be using faith. Certainty is the exact opposite of faith.
That is deeply uncomfortable.
It really is.
But how does that actually play out? Because we aren't just sitting in a room thinking hard thoughts. Faith is an active muscle. What is the link between having this internal posture and external obedience?
The link is that God rarely illuminates the entire 10-mile road. He usually only illuminates the very next step. The sources give us great, tangible examples of what this looks like.
Like what?
Well, it looks like the entrepreneur who feels called to start a business and takes the step to register the LLC, even when the market is terrifyingly volatile.
It's the physical action that aligns with the internal belief.
Yes. Or consider someone rebuilding after a massive financial collapse. The next step of faith isn't magically securing $1 million. It might be the deeply humbling act of taking a lower-paying job just to create momentum, trusting God to bless that obedience.
Right.
In health crises, turning the key might look like enduring the agonizingly slow process of physical therapy, showing up every day when your body is screaming in pain, and trusting God with the millimeter of progress you make.
And in relationships, I'd imagine it looks like doing the excruciating work of initiating forgiveness. Taking the step to extend grace when every fiber of your being just wants to hold on to bitterness.
Exactly. Forgiveness is a massive, massive act of chale.
Okay, but I have to push back here, and I want to ask a question on behalf of anyone listening who has actually done this and gotten burned.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because stepping into the dark is terrifying. We are told faith grows through obedience, right? That we just take the next step. But what do we do when our obedience feels like it leads us straight into a brick wall?
Yeah.
I mean, I know people who took the leap of faith, started the business, and went bankrupt. I know people who took the step of radical forgiveness and the person abused them again. If we turn the key and the door doesn't open, or worse, the ceiling caves in, what then?
That is the most painful, visceral friction of the human experience. It really is. And the text provides a profoundly deep, albeit very challenging answer. We have to synthesize two specific scriptures here to understand the mechanism of endurance.
Okay.
First, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, faith is the substance of things hoped for. And second, Mark chapter 11, verses 22 through 24, which commands us simply to have faith in God.
How does that address the brick wall, though?
Because when we hit a brick wall, we get crushed because we misunderstand what the substance of our faith actually is. We think the outcome is the substance. We think the successful business or the healed marriage is the substance. And when that outcome shatters, we think our faith failed. But the text points us back to, quote, 22, have faith in the power of God. The substance isn't the outcome. The substance is God himself.
Wow. Okay, that changes everything.
Yes, faith is intrinsically biologically linked to perseverance. True, mountain-moving faith is the gritty, grueling choice to continue believing in the character and goodness of God, despite delays, despite disappointments, and despite hitting that brick wall at full speed.
Yeah.
It is trusting that even if the mountain hasn't moved yet, or if it moved in a way that caused collateral damage, the God you serve is still omnipotent, and he is still orchestrating a redemption you cannot yet see.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. It completely removes the pressure on us to manufacture or dictate the outcome.
Exactly.
But I have to say, practically speaking, that requires an immense amount of stamina. If faith is an active muscle, if it's this militant chale that requires perseverance through delays and brick walls, that muscle is going to fatigue.
It absolutely will.
When you are standing in front of an immovable object for years, your spiritual and psychological endurance gets depleted. How do we replenish it?
You have to feed it. You cannot sustain chale on your own sheer willpower. You'll burn out. The text gives us the exact mechanism for how this muscle is nourished, and it's found in Romans chapter 10, verse 17. Faith comes by hearing the word of God.
Hearing, not just reading quietly, not just thinking about it. Hearing.
Exactly. And this connects brilliantly back to the mechanics of the mustard seed mandate in Matthew 17. Look at the specific instruction Jesus gives. You say to this mountain, move. It requires vocalization.
Why is vocalizing so important? Is this just a symbolic gesture or?
Not at all. There is a deep psychological and spiritual causality here. Neurologically, When you are trapped in a cycle of anxiety, your brain is caught in a rumination loop. The fear of the mountain is just echoing in your head.
Like a broken record.
Exactly. But when you speak out loud, you force your brain to process language differently. You literally interrupt the internal loop with an external auditory signal. And spiritually, you are aligning your physical voice with divine decree. You are literally speaking truth to the obstacle.
So when your faith muscle is exhausted, you don't just sit in silence and let the shadow of the mountain crush you. You open your mouth. You vocalize the promises of God over the bank account, over the MRI scan, over the broken relationship.
Yes, you remind the obstacle, and more importantly, you remind yourself of God's omnipotent might. It creates a feedback loop. You speak the truth of God's power out loud. Your own ears hear the word you just spoke. And according to Romans, that act of hearing generates more faith.
Which in turn generates more chael.
Right, giving you the strength to stand firm for another day.
That is incredibly practical. And what is the ultimate truth we are speaking into that feedback loop?
The sources point us to the ultimate promise in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20. God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all we ask or think.
Exceedingly abundantly. Those words carry so much weight. It's not just that he can barely meet our expectations if he strains hard enough. He shatters our expectations.
Right. Gaining access to what, quote, 22 describes as the amazing opportunities that lie ahead means surrendering your limited blueprint. It means trusting that God's vision for what lies on the other side of that mountain is far more expansive, far more redemptive than anything you could have engineered with your own human logic.
Okay, so let's synthesize all of this. We've pulled apart the anatomy of faith today. If we distill everything William Moore is arguing in this text, what is the core thesis?
The core thesis is that biblical faith is not self-confidence. It is not self-reliance. It is unwavering, militant confidence in God. Mountains do not move because you possess a giant, flawless amount of faith. They move because the God you place your tiny mustard seed faith into is infinitely great.
Yeah.
When you actively trust his omnipotent might, the obstacles that once seemed entirely permanent lose their psychological and spiritual power over you.
It all comes back to the object of the faith, not the volume of it. The key, not the vault door.
Precisely.
I want to turn directly to you, the listener, right now, because hearing this theory is one thing, but applying it is where the friction happens. As we close out this deep dive, I want you to carry a few highly specific reflection questions with you. Don't just let them wash over you. Really sit with them today. First, what is the specific mountain you are currently facing that feels entirely immovable? Name it. Don't speak in generalities. Is it a debt? Is it a diagnosis? Is it a betrayal?
You really have to identify the battlefield before you can exhibit valor.
Exactly. Second, be ruthlessly honest with yourself right now. Have you been focusing more on the massive size of that obstacle or on God's omnipotent power? Where is your gaze fixed? Third, are you allowing the very loud voice of fear to drown out the call to be a person of chael, a person of active militant valor?
That requires deep self-awareness to answer.
It really does. Fourth, what specific, tangible promise of God do you need to vocalize out loud today? What truth do you need your own ears to hear to break the cycle of anxiety? And finally, what is the next step? Just the next step, not the whole mile of faith that God is asking you to take. You have the key in your pocket. What does it look like to walk up to the lock and turn it?
And as you think about turning that key, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. We spent this entire time talking about faith changing our perspective of the mountain and giving us the endurance to face it. But what if we took it one step further?
Where does that lead?
What if the mountain standing in front of you right now isn't actually there to block your path? What if instead God allowed that specific, terrifying, immovable mountain to be there because it is the exact stage upon which he plans to demonstrate his glory in your life?
Wow. Not a barrier, a stage. That completely inverts how you look at the terrifying obstacles that drop into our lives. You know, when we started, we talked about how trying to move a mountain with your bare hands is insane. But when you realize whose power is actually doing the moving, the insanity turns into absolute clarity. We don't need to fear the mountain because we are tethered to the maker of the mountain. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope you feel equipped, challenged, and ready to take that next brave step of valor. Keep moving forward, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us today on From Manuscript to Ministry. If today's featured book encouraged, challenged, or inspired you, we invite you to take the next step, purchase a copy, and support the author behind the message. When you invest in their work, you're not just buying a book, You're sowing into good ground and helping advance the kingdom of God through faith-filled storytelling. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Your support helps these powerful voices reach even further. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, keep praying, and keep walking boldly in your calling. God is still turning manuscripts into ministries.